of Device Talks. Welcome back to Device Talks Tuesdays. We've got a great presentation brought to you by our good friends at Aptyx. The title is No Sugarcoating, how to optimize and scale your coding solution. We've got a fairly moderately robust PowerPoint presentation available for you. You should be able to find it on the resource widget. Once again, we'll be taking questions throughout the presentation. We'll probably address most of them toward the end, but if you have questions during, please write them up right away and send them in. If we can address them, then we will. If not, we'll likely get to most of them at the end, but it's always good to know how many questions we have in the queue. This entire presentation is available on demand. So if you're one of the lucky few, the lucky many watching this live, and you know of someone who is who's eager to learn what you're learning, please let them know it's not too late. They can go to devicetalks.com and they can register online, and it'll be almost as good as watching it live. I like a live performance, but you'll be able to pull all the information you need and even ask questions, and Aptyx will get back to you. So if you are watching this on demand, enjoy and get your questions in, and once again we'll get them asked for you. Real quick, when you go to Device Talks, please check out our devicetalks.com, check out our Device Talks podcast network. Get many great podcasts there for you, and we've been fortunate to have Aptyx CEO Greg Tobin on there as well, so it's always great to help companies like Aptyx spread the word. I'd like to thank Aptyx for putting together this presentation, and happy to introduce our panel. We have Jeff Charlton. He's General Manager of Coding and Automation Solutions at Aptyx. Toby Allenbrand, Global VP of Operations, and Beth Harrison-Meyer. Beth and I have been working together on many projects for a number of years now. It's great to have her on Device Talks Tuesdays. Beth, welcome.
It's really great to be here.
Yeah, this is exciting. All right, well, I'll hand the keys over to you, the steering wheel over to you, and I'll be looking for questions from the audience, so please pass them along.
Thank you. Well, we're very excited to talk to you today about codings, and first we will let our team give a little bit more background into themselves. And so Jeff, we'll start with you.
Jeff, are you muted?
How about I'll go ahead?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Ahead,
there we go.
All right, don't fight over it now. Come on.
We're all excited.
Technical newbies here. Thank you for your time. And my name is Jeff Charlton. I'm General Manager of the Kent location of Aptyx, located in Ohio. We've been in the dip molding and dip coating industry for 34 plus years. We specialize in automation, and we are one of the leaders in providing automation for dip molding and dip coating. I'm a mechanical engineer by background, but I've been actively involved in all aspects here, from R&D to development to actually seeing launches of very complex products for our customers.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Toby Allenbrand, Global Vice President of Operations for Aptyx. Been with Aptyx for about 10 years and in the industry for over 15. It's a pleasure to connect with you all today.
And I'm Beth Harrison-Meyer. I lead marketing at Aptyx, and prior to that, led marketing at Viant and also Integer, and have been in marketing and product development for 25 plus years in medtech and also outside, from the Fortune 50 to startups. So today, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to cover. So first, just a brief overview of Aptyx. And then we'll share key considerations for coding application to kind of give a baseline understanding as we move forward. And then some foundational information around common codings and use cases, as well as types of coding application and equipment types. And then we'll really hit where the art and science meet, which is how to achieve a very stable, solid process, and one that's scalable and repeatedly scalable. And then, as Tom mentioned, we are very hopeful for a lot of questions, including throughout the presentation. So Aptyx is a new name. We rebranded in October, and we chose the name Aptyx because it brings together the aptitude and excellence of more than a dozen companies with a 70-year-plus track record in manufacturing, and really with a focus on helping customers solve complex challenges with confidence. And when you look across the bottom here, you can see some of the names of the legacy companies that are now integrated into Aptyx. And there are a couple of things in common. One is just a real entrepreneurial spirit and having found new ways forward in the areas they specialize. And then that is another commonality. All of these companies have very deep expertise and particular capabilities. And then we've been able to integrate those into one single source to provide a full service solution. Everything from engineering to extrusion, where we do millions of feet a year, molding that covers not just injection molding, but dip molding and blow molding. Of course, coatings that we're talking about today, as well as the automation, the development and build of that automation to apply them, assembly, and also tooling to support the molding and extrusion. And we do all this across our global network of more than 10 locations in the US, Canada, Mexico, and China. And then looking at coatings and automation specifically, so the heritage there is from Diptech Systems that Jeff founded more than 20 years ago. So decades of experience, 500 plus projects completed, and 25 plus multi-million-dollar automation projects. So really just deep expertise in a range of applications and types of coatings for the medtech and pharma industry. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Unmuted this time. Thanks, Beth. The selecting of a coating and the application methods thereof are certainly initially our discussions with all customers. And Toby's going to outline quickly here the various types of coatings and their specific applications and products that are applied to. But the overview here is basically the product format, the geometry of the product, what's being coated, what isn't being coated, more importantly in some cases, and the value with regards to the aspect of how it's handled. And then the coating chemistry, we're considering solvents, aqueous-based, and what type of products are they being applied to. So Toby can take a little overview here of the various types of coatings and products that they apply to.
Sure. Over the past 20 years, medical device and pharma coatings have evolved from a value-added option to a must-have feature. Improved device performance and changing medical requirements are key drivers. Coatings can provide many benefits, including increased wear, reduced surface friction, barrier to moisture, method to deliver a beneficial drug, and much more. We're not a polymer provider. However, we do help find just the right blend of additives to meet your project needs. For applications such as lubricity or hydrophobic, just recently we had an application that required first-time smooth actuation. And you can't always depend on a pre-compounded plastic or rubber material, as they typically require actuation, allowing the lubrication to bloom to the surface. For this reason, we may use a topical silicone coating for projects such as a pre-filled syringe, an auto-injector, or an infusion needle. We could also help with wear resistance, antimicrobial coatings, drug-eluting, anticoagulant, and UV inhibitor.
One question, we got a question here, and thanks for those who are submitting questions. Do you folks recommend coatings, and how do you sort of play into the selection of coatings?
We absolutely do recommend coatings. As Toby indicated, we're not a coating supplier, but we've worked over 30 plus years with the multitude of coating suppliers, and some of those are our customers themselves who develop their own proprietary coatings. But when the application is brought to us and a customer does not have a specific coating defined, we're looking at the attributes that they're looking to achieve, and then we're going to suggest possibly considering either a coating or a polymer that might be suited for that to reach those goals. And then we'll offer to evaluate those in conjunction with them to apply those coatings, evaluate the pros and cons of those coatings based on process, based on cost, and based on maybe the product features they're looking to achieve.
Great. Oh, I think you're muted again.
Start off here with the applications and the types of coating how they're applied. Basically, spraying or dipping are the two primary methods of applying a coating. And the automation that's implemented there is either what we refer to as continuous motion or robotic batch. Continuous motion equipment, as it may sound, is basically a process that is continuous. There's no pausing or stopping, so parameters need to be fairly well defined, such as the timing for each of the steps. So it lends itself to a mature process. It also lends itself to a single type of product that doesn't require variability based on geometry or based on chemistry changes. Examples of this might be something that's presented to the equipment in a reel, or on some type of feed that otherwise can then be let into the machine on a continuous manner and also continuous velocity. This would be something similar to a suture. So if you can imagine a suture material taken through a coating system, it starts on a reel, it would go through the various coating steps, and it would be deposited back onto a reel again. A robotic or batch system, which quite honestly is probably the most prevalent with coating methods, is a method that allows each of the process steps to be performed at a station until it's moved to the next station. Very simply, the process may start at loading the product on to the carriers. That could be done by robots or it could be done manually. Then the product is introduced to the cell, which is going to apply the coating, starting off possibly with the initial coating cycle or even a cleaning cycle if necessary, followed by drying the product, and then followed by subsequent coating cycles if necessary. The drying methods can be varied in these particular applications, and they also, as well as the dipping process. If spray needs to be introduced, which can be done in conjunction with dipping, it can be introduced to one of the cells within this batch method. The batch method, in essence, allows the product to walk through the various stations until eventually is completed. Then it exits to an unload queue, where then the operator or some type of automation is taking it on to the next step within the process, or to packaging, or to transfer to the final facility if you're having a contract manufacturer help you, like Aptyx. Products that are examples of this would be catheters, guide wires, balloons, needles or tubes, rigid products such as those, or drug delivery components, which could even include sutures, or it could include stents, which are coated with drug elution that could be released over time to the patient. Process and scalability factors certainly related to the products themselves, the geometry of the products, the size of the product, any unique features of that product that might be need to be considered. The coating, what might be regarding the coating, handling of the coating, duration of the coating's life, the environment the coating needs to be maintained for purposes of consistency, and then the equipment itself with regards to maybe the space available within the facility, how we have to lay that out. So there's a lot of scalability factors that come into play, and throughput, of course, one of them. But mostly all boils down to just discussing with our customers up front the scalability or the actual factors regarding what they're trying to achieve, and the features that they're looking to achieve with regards to the final application. Rigidity of the product, this I think has two portions here. The type of product handling is often determined by the product characteristics. The next slide here would kind of outline the parts that are injection molded or rigid can often be handled in batch or even bulk mode. As Toby alluded to earlier, some cases have been brought to us where there needs to be a secondary feature added to an already molded part to help with the application or achieve the desired application. Case in point, we did have a customer approach us at one point that had a very mature product line. Assembly was already underway, and they wished to address a feature that was a detriment to the actual use of that product, in which they wanted to decrease friction. So they asked us to review how we could apply a coating to help reduce friction in that particular product before it was assembled. We took that product, evaluated the best way to address it in bulk because it was very high volume, commodity style product, and we came up with a method of applying a silicone, non-cross-link silicone that otherwise would reduce friction, allow that to be assembled into the product in an automated manner, without a high level of transfer to the feeding devices used in the assembly process, primarily bowl feeders, and then was able to implement that in a scalable fashion so that that could be produced in several million parts per month for this particular customer. Other products that are rigid but require some finesse with regards to coating are products like catheters and guide wires. Oftentimes, catheters can be supported with mandrels if the coating is not being applied internally. In some cases, guide wires need to be very carefully guided or addressed from a standpoint of not contacting or damaging due to their geometry. Going on here to the geometry and other areas to be coated, the applications may require the coatings be applied only to the interior or possibly only to the exterior of the product. In some cases, we have to block orifices or openings with the product if it's already prefabricated, complete assembly. And we'll do that by putting mandrels or putting some type of masking on. If we have to draw the coating into the interior of the product, it's not uncommon to use vacuum to do so. Based on the properties of the coating, the vacuum and the amount of vacuum applied and the duration which it'll take to draw that up to a precise level can vary quite widely. To expel that coating, it's not uncommon to use an inert gas or some type of pressurized supply to then move or purge that coating from the interior of the tube or the lumen that's being coated, and then to assure that is maybe purged for a period of time, not only acting as a method to make sure it doesn't clog, but also somewhat of a drying step to assure that the coating is set up in the interior and is properly deposited over that period. Exterior coating only can be done simply by reinforcing some unsupported products interiorly, and that could be a mandrel or a guide rod, or sometimes maybe a fixture similar to a tennis racket. We call them dream catchers as the vernacular around here, that would guide the product with minimal contact area around the circumference of the product and allow that coating to be applied but not detrimentally impact the coating, because we have to guide it or allow it to be nested in a tighter array. That's somewhat important from a standpoint of the volume of the coating. Minimizing the volume of the coating is often key to the success of the project, because in some cases the coatings are very expensive or they have a shelf life. So being able to get the array tighter and being able to minimize that coating solution is also a key factor we evaluate.
Jeff, before you go on to the next slide, we have another question, and thanks folks for the questions. And I had the same question about the guide wires. If you can't touch the guide wire or support it at all, how do you handle it during the drying?
That's a very good question. Guide wires can be very long, 3-4 meters in length, sometimes shorter.
Really?
The coated areas sometimes are only a meter, possibly a little bit longer in length, but the rest of the product, if it can be, would normally be held within some type of a fixture or rolled up in within a carrier or a support tube. That's a common way of doing it. But the area that is coated still can be very long, in excess of a couple meters. In that case, you're looking at a way of coordinating the motion of lowering it into the solution with guiding it with very low contact, similar to the dream catcher approach, where you're contacting it in very small areas. You're wanting to contact or push this rope effectively into solution with very minimal contact as you're lowering it down with controlled speed. So in essence, it's similar to mimicking the hand operation of taking your hand and guiding the string. If you were to envision pushing it into a jar of honey, you want to hold that string as close as you can to the honey, at the same time lowering it down in, releasing it, grabbing it again, and lowering it down in. So that very coordinated phased approach of lowering it down has been developed over the years and works quite well with guide wires down to about 10 thousandths in diameter. So we've been able to push literally a rope into honey, and it's worked out very well.
Wow, I didn't realize guide wires were that long. Okay, great, thank you.
Go on to the next slide here. Coating solutions, solvent-based coatings, shelf life, aqueous-based coatings, of course, go along with that as to how they're handled, what we would do with regards to how we would approach a project and maybe make certain recommendations with regards to what would be suggested to start off to evaluate, to optimize how to move forward are certainly key factors. We get into aspects of whether we would suggest, or whether the project would benefit from monitoring certain aspects of the process, such as the environmental conditions, or whether it would be the properties of the material itself that's being applied. Level control comes into that. Certainly if you're coating an exterior portion of the project and you have a very tight tolerance, you wish to make sure that your coating solution level within the bath or within the container is maintained. So we have to maintain the makeup solution. We would monitor level. We would look at the properties of that material dynamically as well, with regards to potentially have to adjust it over time if it need to be adjusted from viscosity standpoint. Drying, UV or thermal are considerations. Both of those somewhat predicated by the coating chemistry itself. Often that's the activation of how the coating is going to dry and maybe adhere to the substrate. The coating might dictate the type of drying process, and that would be something we'd have to integrate into the process. Scalability, we look at how can we best provide the most throughput within the lowest footprint, because often these processes are done in regulated or clean environments, and that's a valuable space for our customers. And we want to look at that carefully when we're evaluating the process to make sure that we can determine what the best material handling option would be. Going back a little bit to the drying side of things, we had a customer approach us on a project recently within the last year or so, and they had developed an internal proprietary coating that they had established, provided the performance they were looking for. And that coating had a process time period that lasted several days. So from the time they applied it to the time that they were ready to consider that coating ready to be put in packaging for future handling purposes, the overall time frame was very extensive. So certainly entering that into any type of production environment would be challenging, just from a WIP or a product that would be in queue multiple days, where the product also lends itself to potentially multiple problems with regards to contamination, with regards to material handling, mishaps, etc. So we evaluated with them very closely using our labs and using some of our material handling input as to how could we cut this multi-day process down to potentially something more manageable from a material handling viewpoint. We eventually got that down into a situation where it could be done in hours, not in days. Still a very long process, because they wanted to make sure that the residual solvents that were being used were fully removed. And that was accomplished by thermal drying and using vacuum ovens in various steps of the process and drying. We couldn't use the vacuum ovens in the initial steps because we would devolatize the solvents too quickly, causing some surface anomalies on the coating. So we had to thermally dry the process first for a short period of time, then apply a vacuum. And then after we applied the vacuum in an oven condition, we were able to then reapply thermal conditions to it at a higher temperature. And at that point, we were able to successfully prove that all the solvents were adequately removed. And we basically mimicked what they were taking several days to accomplish within their original process that they developed. So it's interesting that processes come to us that necessarily our customers believe to be mature, but then we challenge them to discuss how we could optimize that to make it truly something that they could implement in a production environment going downstream, that's going to be manageable, optimize their success, and also their quality.
Jeff, can you just review again the benefits of selecting a coating with thermal drying versus the UV curing that you were talking about?
It's very chemistry dependent, and a lot of times the customers, they'll come to us, they've already selected a coating, and of course that's going to dictate the drying process. From what I've seen from a material handling viewpoint, if somebody was selecting a coating that was either thermally cured or UV cured, the benefits I can see only from a material handling, or only comment on from a material handling viewpoint, is UV curing is a much shorter period of time. Drying using thermal processes, usually lower temperatures, extended periods of time, can make the footprint of the machine slightly larger. It doesn't affect the throughput of the machine, because the throughput's based on the index rate. So if I'm indexing a set of parts every 2 minutes, every 5 minutes, that'll be my rate of which I get the parts out of the machine. If I needed 100 minutes to dry something, I'm going to have multiple drying stations or steps, which is going to make the overall footprint of the machine longer. If I can UV cure that product in one step, basically in 2 to 5 minutes, then it's going to be certainly much shorter or much smaller footprint of machine. And therefore your capital investment goes down as well. The aspects related to potential downsides of having a longer machine could be a failure within that queue. And of course, all that product which is in that queue could potentially deemed to be bad. So having a shorter process and a shorter material handling is certainly beneficial from that regard as well.
Great, thanks.
Equipment and production environment, which briefly spoke of, we'll start discussing with the customer whether the project is actually scalable to move directly to production. If it's already very mature, maybe something has already been in some type of production environment, but they're simply scaling up to a higher volume. We have several customers over the last 20, 30 years that we've worked with that have launched products, and they've been successful, and they come back to us several years later looking to scale up so that they possibly can have more throughput or introduce a new product line to that existing coating process. So we are certainly always approaching projects from different angles, but when customers come to us and they've simply matured something or started to look at something, we may suggest starting off at a lab or with a pilot scale type operation where they can launch, develop samples sufficiently to maybe introduce to a certain test market, and then decide whether or not that is viable to move into a higher volume type of scenario. Equipment often have to be evaluated based on the material handling. We talked about continuous motion and batch earlier, but we also look at what's the importance of how the coating is being applied. The entry speeds, the withdrawal speeds are very important in some coating applications because the meniscus of the coating is often what is applying the coating as the product's being removed. It's not necessarily associated with dwell time. Sometimes the dwell time is actually detrimental because it can remove or maybe detrimentally impact the substrate that's being coated. But we look at very key factors. And if you have a very long product that's being coated and you're moving at a relatively slow speed for withdrawal, you can take a lot of time at a station, in which case it's going to dictate that it be a batch type machine. And we look at what's the type of equipment that's best suited to apply that speed or apply that coating during that speed change or that speed duration. We look at process chemistry control, as mentioned earlier. Do we have to circulate the chemistry? Do we have to monitor the chemistry for viscosity? Do we have to temperature control it? Are we worrying about something that might be in suspension? Oftentimes, some of the antimicrobial coatings have an additive that's in suspension and it's not in solution. So therefore, mixing is key to having consistency of the coating over the entire length of the product being coated. We'll look at what the potential makeup solution might be based on takeaway. Do we have to keep a offline makeup source from a production viewpoint to sustain that coating over a duration of time to make sure that the operator's not constantly there just entering in new solution, but it can be automated. And if we have to adjust that solution from a standpoint of adding maybe a solvent to the solution to adjust the viscosity, which is very important to the pickup rate, as mentioned earlier, we have to monitor that viscosity. It can be done real time with various commercial viscosity monitors or density monitors, and then we can adjust that solution by adding in the base solutions, or sorry, solvents or the cocktail of solvents, because oftentimes they'll have more than one. Environmental control is interesting from a standpoint of how we evacuate equipment normally to maintain solvent-based equipment to maintain the LVL at an acceptable level, the lower explosive limit. So when you evacuate the machine, certainly makeup air has to come from somewhere. Often these machines are located in Class 7, Class 8 clean rooms, in which case the environmental air is certainly suitable to bring into the environment of the enclosure that's housing our machines or our coating process. But in some cases, the air that's being brought in from the clean room may not be environmentally friendly to the process. The humidity may be too high. The temperature may need to be slightly lower than what the ambient environment is that the operator is working in. So we'll look at adjusting that makeup air supply to actually adjust the humidity and lower that humidity as necessary, or adjust the temperature. In some cases, even in the drying process, the humidity is important. So even though you're heating it, you're not heating it to extremely high temperatures, but you want as low humidity within that chamber as possible to possibly allow that drying to occur the way it needs to occur, not interact from a chemistry viewpoint with the coating solution. So that would be a consideration we'll talk about early on with our customers or based on the process that they select or the chemistry that they select. We'll also look at whether or not process considerations, they're looking to bring this inside and vertically integrate a coating to an already existing manufacturing location. That could be in part material handling, how the product is loaded or unloaded from the machine, or if they wish to have this done as a contract service or even consider a third party to do it. We'll discuss options with them and whether they already are working with a contract manufacturer or whether they're looking for a contract manufacturer, in which case Aptyx and our sister division certainly are very poised to help out with those projects. Kind of blew through here. This is our last slide, and
you're doing great.
One of the
great
things
timing.
that
great.
Wanted to, I guess, say is detail is detail. One of the reasons my wife doesn't allow me to go grocery shopping with her is because I'm probably walking around with my phone all the time, calculating the price per gram, per ounce, and what's the best price on everything. That's just the level of details you have to get into. It's similar to what I do every day. We look at the details with customers. Try to adjust their expectations with what's realistic from a production viewpoint. Oftentimes they're more on the R&D or possibly on the development side. Then we start talking about what realistic expectations are for throughputs, for capacity, for handling, and how possibly we can help them with all of the above. The valuation of the coating, determining what is optimal for their application, what commercially is available, what maybe not commercially available, but could be developed, and then also what features might be best for them with regards to either the cost of the coating, commercially available coatings, or the application of that coating and how it might impact their project. We'll help define how to scale it and provide them estimates up front with regards to building a business case so we can evaluate square footage of potential plant area that necessary to support the coating application. We can look at labor content that might be needed for a semi-automated versus an automated process. We can also look at utility cost and then also budgetary cost for what the material itself is going to be, the coating material itself will be. Giving them that information allows them to relate down to what's the true cost that will be eventually incurred to apply this coating to their component. And then is it feasible to move to the next gauge or the next level with regards to moving forward and maybe automate this at a future point.
Fantastic. All right. Now is the time for Q&A. My wife won't let me go shopping because I just doesn't trust me with the shopping cart. But I guess we both have our our challenges. But let's just
yes.
I get overstimulated easily, and I'm always asking for cookies. But so we can go right into Q&A. We got a lot of great questions from the audience. We'll start to get into. We've got a good 30 minutes, so I think we'll be able to work through them. But there is plenty of time for more. So if a question generates a question, please feel free to ask that. And as always, if we're unable to get to all of your questions during the presentation, they're all saved and they'll all go to Aptyx and they'll get back to you tomorrow. With the answer, or this week, I shouldn't speak for Beth, as soon as they possibly can with the answers to your questions. So first question came early on from Keith. What is the most compelling argument to change to a thermal cure coating from a UV cure process? I know we talked a little bit about UV curing earlier, but this is before Keith asked the question, but maybe you could answer that a little more directly.
If he's working with commercially available coating, presumably that's the case. It's going to be dictated by the chemistry of the coating supplier. They're going to come and basically say, we've developed a UV cured coating, or we've developed a coating or a process that requires thermal cure, or what we would refer to as convection style drying. And in that case, what I would say, as I iterated earlier, is if you're at the early stages of evaluating it, then I think you would simply want to determine, what's the benefit of one from a material handling viewpoint for the other. Oftentimes it's the behavior, the substrate that you're coating, the characteristics you're looking for that's going to drive you in that direction, where that coating chemistry is going to establish which of those two you're going to need. So only speaking from the equipment side and the automation side, the footprint of the machine, the less product that's going to be in your queue, which certainly is beneficial at some point from a standpoint of downtime and overall product that's in WIP is benefited by a UV cure because it is a shorter process.
Fantastic. Our next question from Bartos. What kind of coating is anticoagulant coating?
So anticoagulant coating is simply as it's indicated. It's applied to a lot of venous type products that otherwise are going to be subject to generating a shear or friction with the blood that's going to cause clotting. And of course, that clotting, if it's not filtered out, which there are filter baskets and various devices that are intended purely to remove clots from devices, otherwise they're going to cause them, or the body themselves causing them. But the type of coating, it basically is a chemical that's inherently built into the coating that releases, that allows that blood not to coagulate, and therefore not form clots.
All right, terrific. Good opening question. How long does it typically take to launch a project from the time a coating is selected until production start?
Yeah, smaller than a bread box, or smaller than a 747, but bigger than a bread box.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a pretty loaded question. It depends on what the customer is trying to achieve. There are some projects that are able to be mimicked and ride the coattails of predecessors that we can launch and help launch very quickly. There's other projects that we literally start speaking to customers, and 2-3 years later, we get to, be participating in the launch of the product and get to see it actually to market. So medical products, as probably most of the audience and myself are very keenly aware, do not happen quickly. If you are one that has a short attention span, or you're very eager to see things, and you're not going to be satisfied in our industry because things do take time to mature and launch. A typical full automated project, as I think someone mentioned, that we've done some very large automation projects over the last 20 years, can take about a year, possibly a little longer, from the inception to the time of installation. Installation itself, depending on the size of the equipment and the intricacies and the footprint of the equipment, can take anywhere from a month to maybe even 2 months. And then you have validation on top of that. We have some customers that we work with very closely, IQ, OQ, and the PQ aspects of it, and the validation can take a significant amount of time to validate and get that product to the point where it's able to be released. So it's an open-ended question, but it normally, I would say, is in that year to on the positive side scale of time period.
Great. Question from Abdul Hafid. How do you coat the inner surface of catheters, and is the resulting coating is the coating the same as for the outer surface? I hope I'm getting that correct, expressing the question correctly. Yeah.
No, that's good. No, coating both the interior and exterior normally rely, based on the length of the product and the diameter of the interior, normally rely on some secondary operation or force to be applied. The capillary action, the ability for that coating to simply naturally go inside the interior of the coating, is normally not something to count on. So we would suggest normally applying some type of vacuum, controlled vacuum that can be programmable based on the properties of the material and or the length of the coating to be applied to the interior. And you're drawing the coating up possibly at the same time or subsequently as a secondary step as you're coating the exterior of the product. So you're lowering it down in, and you could be applying a slight vacuum to assure that it is drawn up inside the product. You're then going to expel that coating. Similar to withdrawing it, as you're withdrawing it, you're using the meniscus or the boundary layer of the coating to control the deposition of the coating onto the surface. So the faster you withdraw, the more coating you leave behind. The slower you withdraw, the less coating you leave behind. Similar with expulsing the interior coating, if we purge that with low flow and low pressure, we gently remove that coating from the interior, allowing that reverse meniscus effect to occur, and we allow it to drain out under controlled rate. As we're withdrawing the product from the solution, we can apply the coating to the interior very similarly to how we apply the coating to the exterior. properties of the coating are very paramount here. If the coating has a very high viscosity, it's going to be difficult to pull it into a very small lumen. And some of the lumens get very small in cross section, or they vary. There could be multi-lumen catheters that do not all have the same cross sections. So those can be very challenging. They may have to have individual channels that are actually individually programmed to draw the solution up so that it pulls it up to the same elevation or same point on the product. That can be extremely challenging. And if that variation occurs, if there's variation, the production occurs there, because we're dialing this into, literally millimeters of mercury with regards to vacuum, and we're trying to control this very precisely. So if that cross section does change from lot to lot, we have to be able to monitor that. So in some cases, we'll actually look and try to detect where the coating is as we're drawing it up in. If the properties of the product will allow us to do so using non-contact technology, we will look at the coating exteriorly and we'll make sure that we don't draw the coating in beyond where we want to. In some cases, then turn off that vacuum to assure that we reach a constant level.
All right. Next question from Samuel. What are the examples of test equipment you recommend to verify coating thickness? For example, Teflon coated interventional radiology guide wires.
Very specific question. I apologize. I can't answer that. The test equipment is another area, and it's very specific. You're looking at drag. You're looking at reaction in the case of a antimicrobial coating. Some cases dyes are used. In some cases are actually friction test devices used. I know there are some commercially available friction test systems that would be utilized for lubricious coatings. We are on the coating application side, just as we are on the dip molding side. So we're very good at making the products and making the automation for the products. The testing side, we rely on people that are experts in testing and would certainly try to source the equipment appropriate for your application in that particular vein.
All right. Next, we'll take a question from, let's see, Keith. Does substrate material dictate curing methods? Would UV work for everything?
Two questions there. Substrate material and UV curing may be connected. So the coating that's selected could be based on the ability to apply or adhere to the substrate. And by nature of that coating and how it was developed, it could have been developed to be activated or cured with UV. So that in itself, yes, they do go hand in hand. The selection of UV versus convection or thermal drying, again, as iterated earlier, is based upon the coating material. We're not going to try to say, oh, we really don't think you should use UV coating or curing and make you try to implement a thermal drying process with the coating you've selected. That's going to be dictated by the coating you've selected or the process that's dictated by the type of coating. So we would certainly be trying to support whatever is necessary based on the coating material.
Pretty sneaky, Keith, getting two questions in there. You got me. All right. Question from Doug. Have you worked on any drug-coated balloon projects? It's a yes or no question, so just say yes or no.
Yes. Okay, we're done. I like those questions. Yes. Drug delivery, balloons. That's an interesting specific.
So it was drug-coated balloon. Yeah, drug-coated balloon.
Yeah. We've coated balloons, not with drug elution material or release material. We've coated stents. We've coated substrates for in vitro purposes for IUDs, basically birth control, similar to a suture where the drug is absorbed and then it's intended to be released over time. We've made equipment for that. We've helped on projects for that, developed methods to apply that very accurately and to monitor both the application of that very specifically to the amount that was being applied to that substrate or to that surface, and to assuring that the right amount was applied based on the conveyance speed, properties of the polymer, and then even detecting the thickness of the coating buildup on the substrate in some cases where we're doing that with non-contacting devices to measure that coating on a dynamic basis to make sure that the amount being deposited is the correct amount. Certainly that's paramount with drug devices, not as critical possibly with other coating applications, but you wouldn't want that amount of drug on that surface length to be varied. And of course, that's something important to monitor during the coating process with all the other process parameters.
All right. Question from Richard. What specific testing or methods would you suggest for compatibility or performance testing of coatings for lumens?
Back to testing and performance.
Drink of water or something there? You okay?
Yeah.
I feel like I got you in the Senate subcommittee, Mary.
Yeah, it's one of those aspects that the testing we've seen have been dye testing, normally to assure that the coating is being applied uniformity over the length of the product. That's very good information that we covet from our customers, because then we can adjust the equipment features, the speeds, the various, maybe even suggest changes to the coating properties itself by diluting or maybe changing the withdrawal speeds in order to obtain that coating, as we discussed earlier, pulling out faster, higher deposition, pulling out slower, lower deposition of the coating. But the actual testing and the features of the testing is not something that we specifically design or incorporate, other than on-board testing. When we're testing during the production phase, we're doing that with non-contacting. We're looking at the properties of what we're applying to the substrate. We're measuring it if it can be measured, and we're trying to determine variations that we might see optically by using vision systems or measuring systems along the way. But as secondary inspection, secondary testing, we don't get highly involved with that. And back to question was up a little bit ago with regards to the balloons. Something that came to mind, with regards to coatings on balloons, and I consider it a balloon because it is entered from my understanding of the device, it's entered into the body, deflated, that's inflated in the body. But biointestinal balloons are used for purposes of weight reduction. And the biointestinal balloon is a dip molded product or a molded product that normally deteriorates due to the acids in the body over a period of time and eventually is released. There's been coatings that have been applied that allow that substrate, that coated, that balloon, that molded balloon to last longer. And the importance there is certainly to possibly to give some patients that need extra time to have the desired results achieved. And not have to go back and have that procedure repeated simply because that device failed and it no longer performed the way it was initially intended. So there can be coatings on balloons beyond that of potentially antimicrobial or things that are intended for abrasion resistance, intended to prolong the durability of that product, and in this case, the influence of the body fluids and breaking down the base polymer itself. So coatings can be applied to balloons in other ways other than antimicrobial.
Great. Toby, I'm going to hit a hard ground ball to you now. So do you provide assistance from start to final OQ and PQ?
Sure, definitely. So yeah, we can help from the R&D portion all the way through to commercialization. So we've got teams and processes set that we could help you with your protocols and your final commercialization qualification process.
Great. Next question, I'll just pop up in the middle. I'll let either one of you field it. What are typically CPK values as far as coating thicknesses? I don't even know what the question means, but I'm hoping you do. CPK values?
Yeah, you want to take it, Jeff? How consistent can we coat?
Yeah, it's going to be based on the length of the product and the coating properties. They can be held and often are, and that's where the expectations versus reality come into play with some of our customers when they approach us with a fairly long product and they wish to achieve certain characteristics over the length of that product. We can start to tell them that gravity is not always our friend, and as a result, you're going to get variations. I know, speaking from experience of about 60 years, gravity's not my friend, and neither is it to coatings. So at the end of the day, they can be applied very accurately with dip molding. They can be enhanced sometimes with spray, and the orientation of the product, in some cases with spraying, is changed to horizontal instead of vertical. And we can, by manipulation, augment the application and give you even improved characteristics by spraying the coating versus dipping the coating. And if there is the need to do that, certainly it's going to inhibit production. It's going to increase cost. It's possibly going to influence some other aspects of the process, but it can be done. And so we would evaluate the actual need for that variation, but there will be variation, but it can be held very, very tightly with both methods, but tighter possibly with spraying than with dipping, but it can be held very tightly over the length of a product.
Great. We are about 10 minutes left in the presentation. We've got many more questions. I'm so proud of our Device Talks audience. These are great questions, and it's so much fun when we've got a good back and forth going. So I'll keep asking these, but once again, if you have questions that come to mind during the answers of these questions, just ask them. If we're unable to get to them within the next 10 minutes, then you will get an answer from Aptyx. So please don't be shy. So question from Bartos again. Do you have an experience of multi-step coating layer by layer with intermittent washing steps in context of an automation process? Woo.
Well, Bartos, I might already be working on your project as we speak. So I don't know who you work for, so I don't want to get into too much detail because we signed NDAs with all of our customers. So, but at the
Just
end of the day,
send them an email, Bartos. Come on.
Yeah. I will say by that response, I hope you would think that yes, we do. So you have not described something that's very uncharacteristic, where there's a rinsing application done between multiple coating steps that are applied to the substrate or the product, in which case they're followed by a rinse or a washing step and then proceeding on to another coating step. And that's a very common application, seen that in multiple projects. As I indicated, we're working on one right now that's something we started about 20 years ago with a customer. We've made multiple machines for them, and now we're looking at ramping up to a much higher capacity. So very familiar with that process and method.
All right, great.
Yeah, why do you rinse in between?
You're removing residuals that have not already bonded or possibly already interacted with the previous chemistry, so that you don't take that to the next step and then therefore contaminate the next process step.
Next question is kind of a general one. If I have a coating I'm interested in evaluating, how can I obtain samples from a production quality environment?
So let me take it, Jeff. Give you a break.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Way to go, Toby.
I'll pitch it a little bit here. So so Jeff has an R&D facility located at his office there in Ohio, and we're able to simulate production style processes in that lab, so that you can go through all the R&D and qualification part of it before he wraps the automation around the outside of the process. So yeah, absolutely, you can do pre-production R&D samples that would be representative of what you would see in a commercialized application.
And just generally, how many projects have you done with medical device companies? What percentage of your business is in medical devices? We've got a question from someone.
Yeah, the majority of all of our projects are med device related or very high precision projects. So yeah, we're very, very engaged in the medical device arena for sure.
That was my takeaway as well. All right, so we got a few more here, folks. If you still want to get in on it, there's still time. Specific question: do you see an option of coating? It's from Bartos again. Do you see an option of coating the catheters when aligned horizontally?
They can be coated horizontally. There are over 30 years, you see a lot of different applications, not as frequent as others. So they're also very dictated by the product, the characteristics you're looking to achieve, the coating. Flow coating is not extremely common, and that would be a horizontal application where you're pouring the coating onto the product and then recollecting it again. Cup coating is similar, but not done in horizontal motion, but it's done in vertical motion, similar to flow coating. The spraying would be most prevalent with horizontal applications, but I have seen coating projects where the product is drawn through a tray and then the product is inverted or made vertical by drawing it up with the material handling to then align it vertically after it's drawn through the tray of the coating. That's normally akin to historical evolution of how a product might have been homegrown with regards to material handling when we're approached with that type of method, or it could be based on the length and the instability of that product. And it's much easier to start off with supporting it in a tray, drawing it through the coating process, and then vertically orienting it to purposes of transferring it over to a drying chamber. So there are products that are unsupported, no mandrels in them, that could be coated in a horizontal attitude, eventually transferred to vertical for purposes of handling to the next step or the next drying station, and then inverted back to being horizontal for a subsequent coating step. It's not as common as just vertical orientation.
Right. We have time for probably one more. It's kind of a general question. What information is needed to generate an initial business case?
Very good question. So what we would ask, the Q&A we'd have with our customers upon our initial meetings or after we do sign those coveted NDAs to make sure that everybody is protected, we would start asking about what's the goals with regards to the throughput, what are some of the attributes they're looking to achieve with regards to as an internal coating, external coating, what's the coating that they've already selected if they haven't selected a coating, then what type of coating they're looking to apply. We can normally gain from that enough early information to start to determine what the process would be. And when we determine what the process will be, we'll know what the timing, we'll know what the realistic quantity that can be handled on that machine or on that type of equipment and successfully provide the quality they're looking for. And then we can start to work back into minus the cost of the coating itself, what potential labor there would be, what cost or labor costs there would be, what kind of utilities we're talking about, what the capitalization might be with regards to the capital, the investment for the automation, and then determine if that is worth pursuing by putting that into a model for them to evaluate as a business case. Sometimes we can just give them raw data and let them interpret that themselves, guess on the attributes they're looking for, and then early conversations sometimes can be a litmus test for whether or not the project is viable based on their expectations. If they're looking to enter in and have a very tight window from a price viewpoint of introducing a coating or a specific feature to a product that could be provided by a coating, oftentimes that initial discussion is whether or not they decide to move forward or they decide that they have to try to implement that feature somehow, some other way.
All right, fantastic. We'll let you take a drink of water. Great job, everybody involved, our presenters and our audience. I thought that was just a great bit of cooperation. Thank you, Aptyx, for joining us on this episode of Device Talks Tuesdays. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah, happy holidays to folks. Thanks again to everyone who took part. Once again, you can if you're watching this on demand, you have some questions that weren't addressed, ask them before I stop talking, or just rewind and then ask them then. You're on demand. You can do whatever you want. And they'll get the questions will go to Aptyx, and they'll be able to get the answers that you need. So this concludes this episode of Device Talks Tuesdays. We got one more in 2023 next week, and then we'll be wrapping up. If we don't see you there, please have a happy holiday season. I hope you find some peace and joy out there, but I hope we do see you next week here on Device Talks Tuesdays. Thanks for joining us.